Hello, gardeners, and welcome to another Monday where we get together, talk about gardening topics, get your questions answered, and just have a wonderful time hanging out. A lot of us are enjoying cold weather right now, so it's nice to be sitting inside in front of a screen talking gardening topics. And for those of you that are at the beginning of summer, well, we're a little bit envious because you're in the middle of your growing season while we're just beginning to start thinking about ours. Today's the solstice. I'll be talking more about the solstice today. I'll be talking about the changing seasons. I want to talk more about planting and seeds, and we'll go ahead and answer as many questions as I can as they pop up through the chat. I want to go ahead and start off by saying thank you to Jwala Prasad, who started with a super chat before we even got started today. And Jwala has a question. Let's go ahead and start with this. Thanks for recommending Teaming with Microbes. Had a recent video about Teaming with Microbes. A great book. It should be in your library. I have a few logs rotting in my backyard. How can I use them? Well, I think that you already have a wonderful opportunity. Anytime that you have logs in your backyard, take full advantage of them because it's one of those things that many of us don't have that. And the reason I say it's a great opportunity is because when we think about compost and when we think about improving our soil, we are primarily thinking about the microbes, like in the book Teaming with Microbes, and those microbes are primarily bacteria. But when we talk about the logs, it's the fungi that break down the logs, and too seldom do we really think about using the fungi in our backyard and how it can be best used in our vegetable garden, but throughout our landscape. And I've actually been doing a lot of reading, a lot of research, because I want to do more videos where we focus more on the fungal aspects of our soil. And yesterday I watched some lengthy videos that discussed this exact topic. So Dr. Elaine Ingham is probably most noted for developing the idea of the soil food web. And what she is a big proponent of, and I agree, is that we should get our soil to the point where it's about 50% bacteria and 50% fungi. And when you have a balance like that, most of the plants that we're growing in our vegetable garden will be the happiest. Well, the way to do that is to incorporate woody materials like leaves and branches and logs. And I have a video on hugelkultur. The idea of hugelkultur is to bury logs, and rotting logs are ideal. And then you cover those logs, excuse me, you cover those logs with soil, with compost, with other organic material, and you plant typically in a mound, using those rotted logs as the inner material to help really energize the fungi in the soil. Now, when you add the compost and those other organic materials, you'll be incorporating bacteria in the soil. So if you've got rotted logs, depending on their size, I would say use them as the foundation for new garden beds. Actually bury them in the beds, and then you'll grow on top of the soil and the compost and all of the other material on top of it. There are other great benefits. I cover a lot of that in my hugelkultur video. I also have a video on how to fill raised beds, and that's exactly what I do, is I fill the bottom of my raised beds with branches and logs to help encourage that fungal activity. If you don't have new beds in your plan or the logs are too big, you can just incorporate them in the landscape. And so if you start growing plants that like a fungally dominant soil, like fruit bushes or fruit trees, you can actually leave the rotting logs in place or move them to an area where you want to grow bushes and trees. And that same fungal action will enrich the soil where you're putting those new woody plants. So lots of opportunity to improve the soil when you have rotting material, logs being just one of the things. And so I hope that gives you a couple good ideas. I thank you for that super chat. It was a great way to start the day. And it's so nice to see everybody checking in. I see Mrs. Marvel saying happy birthday to Denver 1865. I'll say happy birthday to you too. Looks like Jay is also saying that. So happy birthday, and I hope you have a wonderful week. This is a time of year. My birthday is actually next week. This is the time of year when the Christmas babies, well, maybe some of us didn't have as good birthdays as we would have liked to, so I'll give you as big a birthday wish as I can, because I know this can be a hard time of year to have a birthday. So I hope you have a wonderful, happy day. Let's go ahead. I also want to give a shout out to Laura Fry, who was one of the first ones on today, is happy to be joining the chat, and also had a statement that I just think is fantastic. In a lot of my videos, when I talk about planning your garden and figuring out the best location for your garden, I talk about taking time. And I encourage new gardeners to take a full year. If you want to garden, or even if you want to expand your garden, take the time to look through all the seasons, the entire year. See how the sun plays on that spot. See how the shade plays on that spot. And most importantly, get your soil ready. And so that's why I want to give a shout out to you, Laura, because that's what she's been doing this year, is getting rid of bindweed, getting the soil ready, all in preparation for next season's growing. And that is fantastic. So glad to have you here today, and I'm glad you shared that, because that's really something that I think will give you a huge advantage when you start growing. Everything will be set up, and you'll be starting with a wonderful start to your soil. Patrick, good to see you on this Monday. Thank you for that super sticker. It's nice dropping the mic. I like that. That's good. So thanks so much. Good to see everybody checking in. It's so nice. It's a relatively warm day today. Today is actually about 20 degrees warmer than we had yesterday at this time. It's going to be a little bit warmer during the day, but it's a nice time of year. I know some of you are experiencing cold conditions, frozen hoses, frost, and others of you on the other side of the world are probably already starting to think about how it's getting too hot, and your plants might be beginning to suffer a little bit. So we'll talk more about that as we proceed. Brooklyn Giraffe, good to see you from Brooklyn. I love the Gardener Scott community as well. It's so nice to spend time on these Mondays as we all get together. Georgia Gardener Kevin is making plans for 3 to 4 new beds. I think that's one of those addictive actions of so many of us. When we really get hooked into gardening and we start having so much fun with it, we're always planning new beds. I'm always planning 3 to 4 new beds. So I'm glad to hear that, Kevin. Laura Fry, thank you for that chat. Thank you for the shout out. I love your videos and all the encouragement. Well, I'm so glad to help, Laura, and thank you for that contribution. It's really nice to see that on a Monday. Gerald St. Augustine says, Gardener Scott, does baking soda help prevent early blight on tomatoes? Yes, I have seen a lot of anecdotal evidence, a little bit of research, because of the alkalinity of the baking soda, that if you mix it with water, make it into a spray that on leaves, and it's not just early blight. There's a lot of fungal diseases that are usually introduced into plants through the leaves. I have seen some research that says baking soda can be effective. The biggest issue, and this is one of those things when you start trying some of these remedies, these home remedies, I remember reading one paper that it was one of those, it had to be a precise ratio that they discovered. And that's one of those things where I can't give you a specific blend as to how many tablespoons of baking soda in a gallon of water, because what they found was if it's not enough, then it's totally ineffective. And if it's too much, then it can actually damage the plant and affect the soil organisms as it drips down into the soil. So I'd say look into that, because I know there's some research out there about baking soil and alkalinity and fungal problems with plants, and you might be able to find some better research. But I have seen a little bit that says, yes, it can be effective. And yes, Donielle Fitzgerald asking about powdery mildew, same thing. And that's actually where I've seen the most mention of it, is as a treatment for powdery mildew, which is a fungal issue. And in passing, that's why I say the one research paper I remember reading was talking about other similar diseases on plants, which is why it might be effective on tomatoes with blight. But there you go. There's an opportunity to learn more than the cursory knowledge that I have. If it's something that interests you, that you might want to proceed in the future, and that might jog me to learn a little bit more about it as well. Carla Garner, good to see you this morning from a chilly, cold Nevada. Got worms? I'm working on promoting the food soil web on my new yards here in Ely, Nevada. That's awesome. Dr. Elaine Ingham has a lot of information on that. There's some good videos out there. I just discovered a new channel that Diego Footer is running, and it is a soil-based channel, and it's really small, but all of the videos on the channel are basically podcasts that he's conducting with soil experts. His very first one was with Dr. Elaine Ingham, talking about the soil food web. And it is one of those things, and I've talked about this in videos and live streams before. Soil is key. It really is so critical to the success in your garden that you just can't learn too much about it, which is why I'm starting to learn more and more about fungus and how important a role it plays in soil. Because I've been making compost, I've been improving soil, I've been growing for years, but it's only been fairly recent that I've just learned that fungus is also equally important when it comes to the plants. So so much more to learn. And I'm reading, there's a trilogy of books. Teaming with Microbes is just one of them. And so I think Teaming with Fungus is the next one that I'll be reading. So all good stuff. So I'm glad to hear that, Carla. I hope you have good success. And it's all about the soil. Stephen Luna says, I found that channel the other day as well while looking into the bioreactor. Yeah, I also saw Diego's video about the Johnson-Su bioreactor too. That's how I discovered it, because I think I mentioned last week about the Johnson-Su reactor and how I'll be building one and making a video about that. And I discovered Diego Footer. He's got some really good information out there. Much of the soil information is focused more for farmers and large-scale application, but the science still is applicable to gardeners, so I think it's great. And Jay Dixon says, also subscribe to that soil video series. So awesome. I'm so glad that others are discovering it. And that's one of those things that I suggest and encourage all the time. I love that you watch my videos. I love that you're here on the live stream. But there's a lot of other good sources out there for information, and I encourage you to find as much information as you can. One of the nice things about videos and watching streams like this one is I think it becomes relatively easy. The more you expose yourself to information, it becomes relatively easy to identify who knows what they're talking about. Because there's a lot of gardening channels out there that just make me cringe when they tell you what it is you're supposed to be doing without any regard to the fact that their zone is different, their garden is different, their weather is different, their soil is different. Everything about their garden is different than your garden. And they're going to tell you exactly how to do something. That's why I so often speak in terms of the science and the underlying reasons things happen, because I don't want to tell you how to garden. I want to teach you how to garden so that you can decide for yourself what is best for your garden. I want to explain the why, all the reasons behind it, rather than just some rote memorization of follow these steps and you'll have success. No, it's so much more, and soil is a critical piece to that. So I'm so glad that so many of you are discovering Diego Footer. His channel is smaller, but I'm already starting to follow a lot of his information, and it's science-based and some really good stuff. Lorenzo Lamas, we've recently seen somebody bring up the issue of galvanized metal used as stakes, trellis, etc., corroding and adding arsenic and lead to the soil. Have you ever had issues with this? No, not at all. In fact, arsenic and lead are typically not components of galvanized material. You might have some issues, and so I've got galvanized steel beds, and so I looked into this again, trying to get to the science behind it. And the issues I found and a little bit of research shows that in acid or acidic soils with a low pH, there might be some corrosion of the metal, and you might have some leaching of the base metals. But all of those metals are naturally occurring elements, all of which can be used by plants. So there aren't harmful chemicals that are being used in galvanized metal. And so it's only an issue in acidic soils, and the leaching is only in a very small region around the metal. And if there is any leaching, it's not harmful to the plants. And so for the most part, that's why I'm going with the galvanized steel beds. I'm not planning to grow anything within 3 to 4 inches from the edge, just assuming the worst case scenario, but also because I like my plants in the middle of the bed. But no, I haven't had any issues. I haven't seen any issues, and I haven't read any research or any scientific problems that galvanized metal will cause an issue. And if you think about it, like the galvanized troughs that I'm using for some of my plants, they're made for livestock. Farmers and ranchers put water in them for their animals to drink. And so if it really was a harmful substance being leached into the soil or the water, you know, that wouldn't be something that is so used by so many people around the world. I wouldn't worry about galvanized metal at all. Anne-Marie Tuica, thank you for that contribution. Happy holidays to everybody in this community, and happy holidays back to you. I'll be finishing up today with a little holiday message as well. So it's so nice that all of you are here during the holidays and sharing your time with me and each other. And thanks, Anne-Marie, for that contribution. I appreciate it a lot. Pumina saying, Grace, the name of the channel is Gardener Scott. Okay, thank you. That's nice. That's a nice statement. And Yannette, Gardener Scott, will the extreme vacillations in my mild temperatures cause growing problems? One day it's 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Next day it's 30 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes and no. A lot of it depends on your plants. It is not unusual for me, and I've said this in some of my videos where I talk about the weather, where we'll have days where it will be 70 degrees Fahrenheit one day, that's about 21 degrees Celsius, and it'll drop down to below freezing the next day. It's all about the plants, and it's all about the protection you give. So in your case, that's a relatively, by comparison to what I'm used to, relatively mild difference. You could put up some hoops and plastic, and that'll really help buffer the difference and help keep the plants a little bit more comfortable, if you will. And as long as you're choosing your plants that can handle that. So for instance, if you want to grow tomatoes and peppers, plants that really like warm conditions, they don't do well when you have drastic temperature changes. But if you're growing spinach and chard and beets and a lot of those cool season plants, they'll be able to handle changing conditions really without any impact at all on the plant. So think about that, and all of you, depending on what season you're in right now, really start learning more about your plants and start looking at how weather affects the plants. And you'll learn more and more about microclimates, about what plants you can grow, about what plants do best in your garden. And then when it comes to planning for the next season, you can really start focusing on when to plan the plants so that they'll do best. Like for instance, talking about the spinach and those cool season plants. Well, they don't like hot temperatures, so they'll do fine when the temperature's bouncing back and forth. But when it jumps up above like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, we're about 32 degrees Celsius, now those plants are going to bolt, they're going to taste bad, and it's really not going to be good for those plants. So different plants, different times of year can handle different weather, and that's one of those things you've got to figure out that what works best for your garden. Yeah, it says, gotcha. Sounds good. Okay, good. I'm so glad to help. Mike Watson, should I plant east, west, or north, south? That's a good question, and it depends. I had a conversation yesterday through the comments on my video where I was making the archway. So for the most part, I try to orient my vegetable garden beds north-south. And the reason for that is just because during the growing season, primarily in summertime, the sun is rising in due east and setting due west. And so as it travels across the sky, it's an even coverage. And whether the bed is east, west, or north, south, it really doesn't matter during that time of year. But, and the primary reason I do this is talking about those cool season plants again, the spinach and the beets and the chard and those plants that I'm growing in spring and in fall. Well, the sun isn't directly overhead. For me, it's coming from the south. And so the north-south beds, I'm getting more even coverage as the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest. If you have a bed that's oriented east-west, you don't get as even coverage because the back of the bed, which is the long ways of the bed, tends to be shaded out a little bit more as the sun gets lower in the sky. You can overcome this by just modifying your plantings. So if you put low growing plants, in my case, on the south side and high growing plants on the north side, it really doesn't matter that much about the bed orientation. But because I'm growing all kinds of different size plants in the beds, I find that a north-south orientation tends to get more even coverage for more growing seasons than an east-west bed. But the reason this conversation came up yesterday, my archway is east to west. And so on the north side of that arch, all of those plants will be shaded by the plants on the south side because they're growing up the arch. It actually gives an opportunity because in that case where there is noticeable change between the sun and the shade, I can grow shade-loving plants on the north side of that arch in that bed because it's running east-west. So it depends. It depends on your design of your garden. My archway had to be east-west because of how I've designed my garden. Now I just have to make sure that I select the plants to fit accordingly. So hope that helps. Kristen is saying, Gardener Scott, or you could do low, high, low to get even better coverage. Exactly. That's the idea, is that you can choose your plants specifically to get the best coverage. I just tend to do a hodgepodge of succession planting, and I will plan the height when it's important. But because I'm doing high, low in different areas, north-south orientation tends to work better for me. So Linda Hardwick says, there's a tall, thin gift near the Christmas tree for me. I'm thinking it's a pitchfork. That's awesome. It's so nice. And I'll talk about this at the end today when I start talking about some of those thoughts as far as gifts and gardening. But this is a nice time of year to see what the gifts are under the tree. I sent my son in Louisiana their gifts this last week, and he unboxed them, and a lot for my grandson, of course. But they can't figure out what any of the gifts are. And so I think that's half the fun of Christmas, is just having that suspense that builds, because you you hope you're getting something, you think it might be something, but you have to wait to open it up. So that's great. Hi, Tony. Tony O'Neill from Simplified Gardening is checking in. It's so good to see you here. And as I say pretty much every week, especially when Tony's here, that's another great channel to check out for those of you who might be new to the stream or new to the replay, is check out the Simplified Gardening. And I know Tony's had a rough December as far as health is concerned, and I know many of you follow his channel. But I hope to have Tony on here with me on the live stream in the new year. And so Tony and I will be chatting about that later, so we can set something like that up. And I hope to do more of that next year. As I was watching Diego Footer's videos, I was thinking it would be great to get Diego Footer on board. And so if you have any connections with any of the other video channels or anyone that you would suggest that you can connect me with, I think that's a nice direction that we can move this live stream, is to start getting some guests involved, just like we did a month or so ago with Tony. And Tony was a great guest. Always nice to talk to him, and I know you all appreciate Tony as well. Jay Crewbug, thank you so much for that contribution. And I like your dog. I'm a dog person, so I like that picture you have on that contribution. That's so nice. Okay, let's see what else to do. Yeah, exactly, Tony. I had the same thought. In fact, actually, I was thinking, I know Hugh Garden, or Hugh's Garden, I think that's what he's calling his channel now. I was thinking about him the other day and thinking a three-way with us on the chat would be a nice opportunity. So I'm really hoping to explore and give you as much information as we can in the new year. Yes, I know a lot, and I'll pass all I can, but especially this last week when I've been doing my research into fungus and soil, there's just so much I don't know. And so the opportunity to share information with other knowledgeable gardeners not only helps you out, it helps me out too. Every time Tony and I talk, I learn something new. So it's just so incredible when we can all combine the resources and share the information. Highlands Community Club asks, is eucalyptus mulch okay to put down in my percent area? Eucalyptus mulch is okay. So eucalyptus mulch is one of those things that is often recommended to avoid because it can hinder the new growth of plants. But as with most mulches, you've heard of this probably with juglone and black walnut trees, and you shouldn't use black walnut wood in your garden. And there's some validity with that. The same with the eucalyptus oils and the juglone in the walnut trees. The chemicals can harm plants and they can hinder new growth. But once that wood is chipped up, and especially once it's dried out, all of those chemicals are essentially gone or rendered inert, especially when they come in contact with the soil. And so I know many gardeners that use eucalyptus mulch around their plants in California with absolutely no issues at all because they're using dried wood chips of the eucalyptus. You might not have as much success if you're using fresh eucalyptus leaves, but as far as the wood chip mulch of eucalyptus, if you can find a good source for it and it works for your garden, I say go for it. Now, one thing that I'm going to start saying more often, and you probably haven't heard me say this much in the past, I use a lot of wood chip mulch. In my fruit tree orchard that I've been developing, it's all mulched right now with wood chips that are about 5 to 6 inches thick to cut down on weeds, but also to help improve the soil. When you use a wood chip mulch, it's really best to use around trees and woody plants like shrubs and bushes because it's that idea of developing a fungally dominant soil. Fungus is what will break down those wood chips and help improve the soil. Woody plants prefer a fungally dominant soil. So if you're going to use wood chips in your garden, which I encourage you to do as a mulch, they are best used around other woody plants to help get that whole fungal activity working in your soil. So I'll be talking more about this in the future. I'm planning a couple of videos to talk about this as I learn more about it as well. I've always kind of known it and I've always done it, but now I'm learning the science behind it, which is really cool. Okay, Teddy Bear DIY says, greetings to all. My connection is terrible at the moment tonight, so I won't be staying. I'll watch the replay another time. Well, thank you for tagging along today. Sorry to see you go, but we'll see you in the replay. Okay, let's see. It's so good to see the interaction between Jay and Tamara and Mrs. Marvel and Linda Hardwick. You guys are just so awesome. Richard W. says, an arborist dumps his wood chips for free on my property. That's an excellent option. There's a service in the United States called Chip Drop, and you can go to getchipdrop.com, and they link up with arborists to drop wood chips on your property. It's a great option if you can find an arborist. In my area, I've been signed up for the Chip Drop for over a year, and there are no arborists in my area that are participating in that program. I hope that will change this year, but that would be a great option. I went, I think 6 or 7 times to our local chipping and mulching site, and each time I picked up about 2 cubic yards of wood chips. And so I've got between 10 and 15 cubic yards of wood chips that I've been spreading all throughout my garden this year. So you can get that much in one load from some of these arborists if you can find one, or if you sign up with Chip Drop. So glad to hear you do that, because that's exactly the way to go. There's so many free sources when it comes to wood chips. I don't often recommend buying it, because just a little bit of searching should enable you to find the wood chips that you're looking for. So I think that's one of those things that look for, and maybe you'll find, and then you'll have all the chips that you could possibly use. So that's awesome. Let's talk a little bit now. One of the topics I wanted to discuss today is seasons. This is the solstice. The seasons are changing, and this is one of my favorite times of year. In fact, I have a video from exactly a year ago where I talk about the winter solstice is one of my favorite gardening days, because this is a day where we transition. Starting tomorrow, the days get longer. And so for those of us that are just really chomping at the bit and looking forward to growing plants, every day brings us that much closer, with the sun being a little bit higher in the sky and the day being a little bit longer. And it's just such a wonderful time of year. And I do feel a little bit for the summer solstice people when I'm at that point. You know, you feel a little bit like now the summer is here and the days are getting a little bit shorter, and that season will come to an end before we know it. So it's a dichotomy depending on where you are in the time of season. But regardless, look at your garden. Really take a good look at your garden at this time of year, be it summer, be it winter, because I think that it's really a good opportunity to identify areas of your landscape that you can really improve upon. So I know we talk a lot about vegetable gardening. I know we talk a lot about individual beds, but there's a lot more to gardening than just growing vegetables in a bed. I'm always trying to improve my landscape. And one of the ways I try to do that is by developing a 4-season interest. The ability for your landscape and your garden to look good all year round. And so for those of us that are starting winter, look at spots in your yard right now that just don't look good. They look terrible in winter. Well, that might be a prime candidate for planting an ornamental grass, because ornamental grasses look great in the winter. They're brown, but especially on the cold mornings with a little bit of snow, ornamental grasses can really add a nice pizzazz to your garden space. And the same with the summertime. During the summer solstice, I like to look at my garden, and if I see a blank spot, where the flowers have already faded from the spring blooms and maybe some of the plants are brown and died back. Again, it's a great opportunity to now put some plants in that area that are blooming during the summer. They like the heat. And so as we think about planning our garden, and that's a theme that we've been discussing in recent live streams, as you're planning your garden, start thinking about your entire garden, your entire landscape, and the plants that you can add to really highlight all 4 seasons. And this isn't something that you can necessarily improve upon all at once by ordering seeds right now, but you can go outside and identify some of the spots that you want to improve. And then you come back inside and you look through the catalogs and you do a little bit of research. You figure out that maybe you want a purple perennial flower. And so you find out what purple perennial flowers do best in your climate. And now you can order those seeds or you can get those plants. So start adding that to your planning repertoire of the winter planning or the summer planning, whatever the time of year that you're looking at your garden. What can you add to your garden? What can you change? What can you modify? And sometimes it's just adding a structure. It might be adding a little bit of garden art. It doesn't always have to be a plant. But what looks good during all 4 seasons in different areas from different views. And I think that's something that can really improve your gardening skills by being able to look at your garden and your landscape as a 365-day show, a 365-day set of activities that keep you happy throughout the year. So I just wanted to throw that out at you. And so, Laura, thank you for that super chat that you gave as I was starting to talk a little bit about that. And Highlands Community Club, I appreciate that contribution as well. That's a nice super chat. Some seed money, loving this channel. Thank you. The video that's coming out this next weekend talks about seeds and my addiction to seeds and how I just can't stop buying them. But really the message of the video is more about developing an organization system so that when you do buy seeds, you're buying the seeds that you need and that you want for purposes of improving your garden. And I actually talk a little bit about that in the video, how I'll look at my garden and I'm trying not to buy too many more seeds, but I'm going to use the plants I have, put them in, put the seeds in, and then see what happens. And then look for what else I need. And so after I put this next season's plants in the ground, primarily the native plants and the perennials and the grasses and the bushes and the trees, then 6 months later and 12 months later and 18 months later and 2 years later, I do a continual review to see what's missing and what else I need to put in. So thank you for that, because seed money is always good because there's always seeds to buy. And so here's a question, because I think most of you will probably watch the video when it comes out on Saturday, but take a guess. I'm interested to see what you think. Take a guess of how many seed packets I have in front of me on the table as I'm making that video. So you'll get the answer in the video because I'm very specific about how many seed packets I had because I counted. But I'd be interested to see what you all think about me and my addiction to seeds, as far as how many seeds I would have on a table in front of me as I'm making a video about seeds. So PD is guessing 600. Danielle is saying 35. Jasmine's saying 100. Lady Casca 47. Lars 75. Chris is saying 3,000. It's not quite that big. Let's just say so far I'm seeing a lot of low guesses. A lot of low estimates. And Megan says 2,000. That's a little high too. But that's good. Thank you. It's good to see the guesses coming in. Yep. There's a few good ones there. But most of you are still pretty far off. So look for that video on Saturday, because it's one of those things when you just keep gardening and keep gardening and keep trying more things, and you just get enticed to get more and more of the seeds. Laura Laspi, so far you're the closest, so it's good to see those. Nice. PD is in the zone. There you go. So Linda's saying, I love buying seeds too, but I'm good at sharing. I buy too much quilt fabric too. Not so good at sharing fabric though. That's good. Yeah, and I'll be talking more about sharing, and I've talked about sharing in recent weeks as well. I think sharing is good. I'll be doing a lot of sharing with the seeds that I have, because particularly when you have that many, when we talk hundreds and hundreds of seed packets, it just reaches the point that you just can't grow that many. And it was fun to look through the catalog, and it was fun to choose what you wanted to grow, and it's fun to grow. But at some point, you have to realize that you just have too many seeds. And one of the best things you can do is share those seeds. Give them away to others who might benefit. So that's great. So good to see that all. Steve Tanistra from the garden. In spring 2019, there was an arborist working in front of my house, chipping up a huge willow that fell over. They were happy to dump the wood chips in my driveway. Probably got 12 yards. That's great. That's awesome. That's like I was just talking about earlier. That's such a nice option. Lars saying, I had a Fusarium Wilt for the second year, this year 2020. I pruned the lower branches, mulched heavily, and spaced the plants farther apart. Any ideas how to prevent in 2021? You've got the right idea. One thing that you can try, and I don't talk often about this, but when you get your tomato varieties, there are many varieties out there, many cultivars that are resistant to Fusarium Wilt. And it'll say so on the plant tag. I want to say it has an F on it. And Tony, if you're still on, you can help me with that if you know for sure what the code is for Fusarium Wilt on the plant tags. But look for plants that are actually resistant to particular diseases. And tomatoes have a lot of diseases, and so a lot of cultivars have been developed to develop the disease resistance. And so there's an option. You're doing it right. Create healthy soil to include the fungal activity. That's a big component. That'll help get strong plants. Mulch. You prune off those lower branches. Don't put your plants too close together so that there's lots of air circulation, and you get a variety that is resistant to Fusarium Wilt. And that's the best that you can do. And you should see fewer problems when you encounter something like that. Okay, love always. Jasmine saying, I used coconut husk mulch this year. Have you ever used it? I haven't. I've looked for it. It's something that I really haven't been able to find in my area. And it's a little bit different than cocoa core, which I have used. I used that in some potting mixes, but I haven't used the husk as mulch. So let us know how it works for you. That would be something new for me. Jeff's saying, would you mind speaking quick towards the issues with Aminopyralid and compost? And I referenced this briefly in the last week or two when I was talking about straw, and the video that I'm planning to do here in a few months where I'm talking about contamination on straw and other materials you might use in your garden. Aminopyralids are becoming, it's residue that is on material, often straw, and it's the result of the chemicals that are being used when those crops are being grown. And then you buy straw typically, and it's got the aminopyralids still in the material, and it could cause some damage if you use that in your garden. The problem is so seldom is that announced to the retailers. And so when I go to buy my straw, I'll ask the question and they have no idea what I'm talking about. If you can find an organic source for things like the straw you're using in your garden, they should be able to tell you that you don't have any of that chemical residue on it. One of the things that I recommend, back to the point of your question, is if you have any suspicion that you might have any chemical residue on any material that you're going to be using in your compost, wait. Take time. Because much of the research, many of the studies that I've seen University peer-reviewed research on the topic shows that for the most part, after 6 months, that residue is no longer on the straw. The aminopyralids will no longer cause damage. It can be up to 12 months depending on which chemical was specifically used. And so like this time of year, for instance, this is the time of year I buy my bales of straw and I just let them sit outside by my compost bins for 6 months. It'll be 6 months from now before I use any of that straw as mulch in my garden. The straw that I'm putting on my beds or just recently put on my beds, same thing. I bought that straw back in March and I put that straw on my beds in October. And so that's how I do it, is I just allow enough time so that the compounds have dissipated, they've leached into soil that I'm not growing in, or their half-life has become a non-concern. So time is basically all you can do unless you know you have a good source for the material. So I hope that helps out. Okay, Jay says plant tag should read F or VF for resistance to Fusarium wilt. Okay, thank you. And actually, I think the VF, the V stands for verticillium wilt. And so thanks, Jay, for checking that out. So those are the kind of things you can look at on plant tags when you're selecting your plants. And tomatoes, it's most prevalent, but you'll find it on other plants as well. Other plants that are very susceptible to diseases, you can find cultivars that are disease resistant, and they'll give you that code. So F for Fusarium wilt, VF will also be resistant to Fusarium wilt, and then the V is that extra protection as well. Danielle's asking, how do you store extra wood chips? I found mold on mine that were in a bucket with a lid. I have big piles, and I'm allowing them to break down, and I'm allowing them to get mold and fungus on them. Mold is not a bad thing. It just looks bad, but that is part of nature starting to break down that material. And so when you get the fungal activity in your wood chips, it's actually a good thing. So don't be so concerned about finding mold on your wood chips. Once you spread it out in the garden, anything that's on the surface is going to dry out. Very little likelihood that it's going to pose any damage to your plants. So I wouldn't worry about it at all. I have stored wood chips in big trash can containers. When I didn't have a lot, I've stored wood chips in big plastic bags. But nowadays, I just leave them out in the open in a big pile because I've got the space to do that. So a lot of it depends on the space, I know. But depending on your wood chips, any container that's big enough for the wood chips should be good. If you don't want that mold or the fungal development, then try to keep the chips dry, because it's when the chips get wet and stay moist that you'll start seeing that fungal development. But again, I don't think that's a bad thing, because we want to incorporate some of the mycelial action and all of those little white threads that you see. That's the fungal action that is really so good for soil. So keep it going. Should I leave the lid off? Yeah, that would be one of those ways to dry it out. And then if it's going to rain or be exposed to moisture, just cover it back up again. So that's the best action to take if you want to avoid those mold or fungus issues. Linda's saying, I'm interested in the green vertical trellis in your background. Beautiful garden. Thank you for bringing that up. So this comes from Lorein Green today, who sent me this background. And I think it's a really nice one. This is like a balcony view down to the garden. And it's a relatively small garden space, but I like it. It has the bushes. It's got a relatively small single raised bed area, low raised bed. You can see the tomato trellis that's set up in it. There's some ground cover. There's lots of mulch. You can see some of the woody plants and the perennial flowers around the edges. I agree. I think this is a beautiful little garden. Nice, orderly, and clean. And so thanks for sharing this picture. And I've got another, I think I've got 10 in the queue right now for the weeks ahead. So I always encourage to send me a picture of your garden. Tell me a little bit about it, and I'll add it to the queue. And so this obviously is a picture that was taken a few months ago when things were green, and probably looks a little bit different now, but I wanted to add that little bit of green on a cold morning. So thanks for asking that question, because one of the things that's so great about gardening, and I love seeing all of your gardens, and I watch gardening shows so that I can see other gardens, and I watch gardening channels so I can see other gardens. There's always something that you can pick up from someone else's garden. You see how they do something, and it just gives you an idea of something to try. It doesn't even matter what the plants are, but I just look at this garden from Lorein Green, and it's neat and it's tidy and there's room to work, and I see how the plants go together, and you can see look at the shade, and you can see the shade is going off to the side, and so that big bush that's off to the side, that's one of those things that, this whole big bush over here, that's going to be shading that whole spot. That's one of those things that you learn as you garden, is your shade and your sun and all the rest of it. So I just think this garden looks great, and there's so many lessons to be learned and ideas to get. So that's awesome. Chris, thank you for that contribution. Tips on how to kill mildew before the season starts. Air circulation. That's the biggest issue to deal with powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is, believe it or not caused by wet conditions. It's actually caused by dry conditions, and it's often weather related when you have a change in the weather, but it's air circulation. If your plants are growing too close together, you are increasing the likelihood of getting powdery mildew on your plants. If your plants have air all around them through the leaves, you're decreasing the possibility of getting powdery mildew on your plants. So right off the bat, as you're planning your garden, think in terms of spacing for your plants to increase air circulation. Right off the bat, that's the easiest and the best way to deal with the problem. And so you can start taking care of that right now. Get your soil nice and healthy. That'll help as well. Healthier plants can survive it better. But air circulation, air circulation, air circulation. That's the way to do it. So, okay. Sharon is saying, we had so much water leakage, we used thick black plastic to line the sides of our raised beds. Should we be concerned about the plastic leaching? This is one of those issues. It does depend on the plastic. And most of us don't know what our plastics are, what our propylene sheets are. Most of us don't know the components of it. I'm not that concerned about plastic. I use plastic over hoops around my plants. I know that for many gardeners, like lining beds, plastic is a great option. I have not seen any university studies that show any issues with plastic harming plants when you're using them in a case like that, where you're lining beds. There are many commercial growers that are lining entire fields with plastic. And then they have machines that come through and punch a hole in the plastic and they grow their plants. So just by having some plastic in your garden, I don't think it's an issue. Now, I know that there are many gardeners from a philosophical point of view don't like to use plastic, but from a scientific soil perspective, it hasn't been shown to create issues that I think home gardeners are going to encounter. Now, if you have, if you have plastic that is exposed to sunlight, then that plastic can break down, and some of those chemical compounds might find their way into your soil. So if you do use plastics in your garden, you'd want to remove them before the sun starts cracking them and breaking them down, because that is the point when you might see some of those chemicals getting into your soil. But for just basic use, especially when it's buried in soil, so you're not going to have any of that ultraviolet ray damage, I don't see it as an issue. It's personal choice, and if it works for you, then I say go for it and keep doing it. Music Box Dancer saying, going to pull up raspberries. Can I plant a blueberry plant in their place? You got to check your soil pH. Raspberries and blueberries grow in different pH conditions. And so if the raspberries weren't doing well because the soil was too acidic, then your blueberries might do great. If the blueberries did great if the raspberries did great because the soil was a little more neutral to alkaline, then your blueberries aren't going to do well at all. So you've got to find out what the pH of your soil is before I make a blanket statement that blueberries will do well in the spot that you were growing raspberries. Blueberries really like acidic soil, and that makes a big difference when they have the areas that they like. Rufia75, have they done any studies on lining plastic in beds? Just because studies don't exist doesn't mean it doesn't cause damage, right? Exactly, yeah. I don't, I know I've seen some stuff about plastic pots and plastic containers. I don't know that I've seen a study on plastic lined beds like with the sheets. And you're right, just because the study doesn't exist doesn't mean that it's not a problem. But in general, the studies I've seen on plastics show that it's not an issue. I haven't seen a specific study on plastic lined beds using plastic sheets. And so you just have to decide if there's a correlation or not based on other plastic studies, even if there's not a study about that specific topic. But that is a good question. Yes. It doesn't imply that because there's no study done that it's okay. It just might be that no study has been done because universities are more focused on farmers than they are on home gardeners. So that's something just to think about along those lines. Okay. So Charles Coker saying, I put white row cover as a shade over my tomatoes. They never wilted down during the heat of the summer. Great idea. I'm going to be doing more of that this year in my new big area I pointed out last week in the picture behind me of my garden. I'm planning on covering the whole thing with a white fabric to help shade my tomatoes just because our summers have been getting so hot. It's also going to be hail protection, but it's going to give that extra little bit of shading. So I think that's a great idea, especially in very hot areas. A little bit of shade for your tomatoes can make a big difference because they don't like it when it gets very hot. Richard W. is saying, I saved seed from store-bought spaghetti squash. Will these seeds germinate? They should. There's no guarantee that you're going to get the same plant because so often plants that are sold in supermarkets and grocery stores are hybrid plants for various reasons, for shipping reasons, for storage reasons, for cost reasons. So those seeds should definitely germinate. You just may not get the exact same squash plant when you plant those seeds, but it's a nice inexpensive way to get seeds is to save seeds from your store-bought material. And I say go ahead, do it. See what you get. You might get some delicious spaghetti squash because maybe that was an open pollinated variety. It's always worth the try, but don't be surprised if it turns out as something different than the specific spaghetti squash that you bought and saved the seed from. Okay, let's see. Debbie Arthur, my new beds are filled with leaves, logs, branches, and wood chips halfway. Then I will put in good garden blend soil. Are wood chips okay to use? Absolutely. Yeah, wood chips, again, I would use wood chips in the bottom of the bed to develop that fungal activity that will really benefit your soil. For most of our vegetable plants, though, they really don't benefit from a wood chip mulch as much as they'll benefit from a grass mulch or a straw mulch or even a leaf mulch. The wood chip as a mulch in vegetable gardens is not something I regularly recommend. But as far as filling the bottom half of the bed, absolutely. And I'll be doing that in all my new beds as well with all of the yards of wood chips that I have. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more. And I know I've touched a little bit on the seed selection. I wanted to talk a little bit more about that as one of the topics for today. Because this is a great time of year for planting. Whether you're starting summer and starting to think about your fall crops and you don't have those seeds yet, or you're entering winter and you're thinking about your spring crops and you don't have those seeds yet, this is really a good time of year where you can look at, like I talked about in the recent video, the reasons you're putting plants in the garden, and typically it's because you're going to eat the plants that you want to grow. Well, one thing I want to encourage all of you to think about as you're selecting your plants, it's great to be loyal to a particular seed company, to be loyal to a particular nursery. I think that is great, and I do encourage that. But I also encourage that you try something new. And so order as many seed catalogs as you can, look through them. And if you are used to buying from, let's say, burpees, you go to the grocery store and you buy burpee seeds, and you've always done that. That's great, nothing wrong with that. But what you may find is another seed company out there that's selling the exact same seed at half the cost. Or maybe they're offering a very similar seed that is different enough it's something you want to try, but you won't see that at the burpee stand at a big box store. So this is a great opportunity to really expand your gardening world as you think about, what am I going to grow in my garden? This last year, I grew 3 different types of beet. I grew the dark red beet that we're used to. I grew a yellow beet, and I grew a white and red striped beet on the inside. 3 different types of beets. And it was awesome. It was the first time that I'd grown 3 varieties all in the same year. And it really gave me and my family, my sister-in-law just absolutely loves the golden beets. My neighbor loves the golden beets. I grew so many golden beets, I gave a bunch of them away. And the favorite was clearly the golden beets. And so as I move forward, now golden beets are going to be part of my regular garden plan. Beets do well in my area. They do great in my climate. They're so easy to grow. So if I'm going to take the space in my garden to grow beets, I might as well grow a beet that I like and my family likes and my neighbors like. And in my case, I've discovered it's golden beets. Now, I'll continue to explore new varieties and new options. But that's just one of those examples of how if you try new things, you might discover that the new thing is better than the old thing. Not that the old thing was bad, it's just the new thing is better. And so in seed selection, you might have, as I encourage you do, your list of, I'm going to grow tomatoes and peppers and squash and melons. That's nice. That's a nice list to start. But when you start getting down to exactly what seeds you're going to plant, the varieties you're going to grow, this is the opportunity to really move beyond your comfort zone. And so if you love the red cherry tomatoes, as I do, well, now this year maybe grow some yellow cherry tomatoes and do a comparison, see which ones you like best. Sun Gold tomatoes are delicious. Sweet 100 tomatoes are delicious. They're both cherry tomatoes. One is yellow or orange, one is red. And I grow both of them because I can't decide which one is better. I wouldn't have known that I like both of them until I started expanding beyond a little bit. And Sun Sugar was recommended to me this last year. Same idea. Sun Sugar and Sun Gold are very similar, but they have different tastes. Well, you wouldn't know that until you started buying some seeds that are new to you. You can grow them the same way as you did the old plants, but the results might be completely different. So add that to the planning when it comes to your seed selection. Be a little bit out there, explore, be adventurous, and try something new. And then at the end of the season, when you're keeping track of what happened and how you liked it, you can either write it off completely and not do it again, or definitely do it again and decide it's something that you want to continue, like I have with so many of those plants. Okay, let's see. Jay Dixon is saying support with a thumbs up. Thanks, I appreciate that. You're so awesome, Jay, giving all those reminders of things like thumbs up and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, either watching live now or watching on replay, by all means, subscribe to the Gardener Scott channel so you can be notified when you click the bell that we've got all the new videos coming out. You'll get notified. If you select all notifications, you should be notified whenever a live stream is happening too. And so that's just a great way to keep us all in the loop. So thanks for pointing that out. Thumbs up, subscriptions, all the rest. It's so nice. We had with a lot of good contributions today with the Super Chat. I did want to mention that as well, because I noticed last week in the comments, some people asking what those dollar amounts were, why some of the questions were in different colors. And I understand, you know, so many of us who are making videos on YouTube, I understand a lot about YouTube, but not everybody does. And so the difference is, if you look at the bottom, just below where all the chat is, where you're typing in your chat, you'll see a little money symbol. And so if you click on that money symbol, it gives you the opportunity to give a contribution to whoever's doing the live stream. And it's not just me, it's on all the live streams throughout YouTube, whoever you're watching. So if you're watching Simplified Gardening and Tony's doing a live stream, you want to give him a little boost for seeds or whatever, that's how you do it. You click on that little money symbol and you get to decide how much you contribute. And based on how much you contribute, it's a different color. And so that's why it shows up as a color. So like right there, Nachi G, who's on the road today in Moab, Utah. I love Moab. It's such a great place to go ATV and just see some amazing scenery. So thank you, Nachi. I appreciate that contribution. But you'll notice that it's in yellow. Well, yellow means it's $10 or above. And that's what it is. And so like in the description below where I talk about how Super Chat contribution questions will get priority, it's because I can see it pop up just like you did. You can see how Chris, who's already given before, gave a wink contribution, and that's a super sticker because it's got a little face on it. And so it's just one of those things that if you like what you're hearing and you're benefiting from the live stream, you can give that contribution. And so those of you who are new and may not have understood that, that's what it's all about. And that's why when I see one of these pop up, I try to really focus on it and thank the person giving the contribution, because it really is greatly appreciated. And it knows that we're all, or I know that we're all part of the same community and that you really are benefiting. So there you have it, a little bit of the workings of YouTube. You can still ask your questions. You can still be involved without doing a contribution. That's just one of those things that is highlighted, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today. So hope that helped out a little bit. And thanks, Chris. We thank you, sir, and I thank you. You're such a great regular viewer and always active, and I know so many of you are here every week. It's just such an awesome community. It's so nice. I look forward to it. I know you all do too. So it's just incredible. Okay, one of the other things I wanted to talk about today was a little bit more just about the idea of the solstice as far as planning. And so if you're a new gardener, one of the hardest things to do is figure out how to start planning. And in my most recent video, I give you some ideas about this. But trying to develop a structure, trying to develop a system really can help with your planning. And so I think the solstices are our ideal time. That's why I've talked about it before, or why I've already talked about it a little bit, and why I want to talk more about it. You should have a garden journal. You should have a garden plan. They should work together. It doesn't always work that way. Life gets in the way. We get busy. A lot of times we just go out and do whatever needs to be done at the time. But I really try to stop on the solstice, on both the winter solstice and the summer solstice. I really try to stop and make that day a garden planning day. That's a day that I use to orient my entire gardening year. regardless of whether it's the winter solstice or the summer solstice, I use this day as an opportunity to start the clock clicking or ticking in one direction or the other. The winter solstice, okay, the clock is ticking toward growing. It's ticking toward starting seeds. It's ticking toward making sure the garden beds are ready for planting. If it's the summer solstice, the clock is ticking too. It's clicking toward the end of the season. It's clicking toward succession planting and maybe some of the plants that are fading in summer, what I'm going to replace them with. It's ticking toward the end of the season preparation as far as the mulches and the amendments and all of the bed preparation that I need to do going into winter. And so this is just a great time of year. Think of them as bookends for the beginning of the season and the end of the season, or however you want to look at it. But it's really a great opportunity, especially for new gardeners, but even more so, I think, for old seasoned gardeners like me who have picked up old bad habits. It's a good time to stop and really plan out, really think about your garden and what you're going to be doing as you move forward. It's a little bit forced, I know, but it's so much easier to say on the winter solstice or on the summer solstice, these are my planning days, than to just be kind of nebulous and just it happens as it happens, because like I said, life gets in the way and you might be planning to plan your garden, and then before you know it, it's time to start planting and you never did get to the plan. Planning really does help lead to success. Today's the day to do it. So when you're done with the live stream, it's one of the things I'm going to be doing. I'm planning a video here in a couple weeks. I'm going to shoot it today or tomorrow, where I'll be talking about catalogs and different catalogs, which ones I encourage for different gardeners at different levels. What's one of the things I'm going to be doing today is looking through my catalogs for preparation for that video, but also for myself, because I got to buy more seeds. I got to figure out what I'm going to put into my plan. And today's the day to do it, in addition to any other day where you can fit it into your schedule. PJ, that's awesome. Thank you for that super chat. That's incredible. Hello from South Jersey. We got a lot of snow, but we're using a hoop garden and still growing carrots, lettuce, etc. Thanks for all the great advice. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, the American Northeast got slammed by a nor'easter this last week. Literally tons and tons of snow. So I'm glad to hear that you're still able to garden in Jersey, and I hope the hoops and the rest of the winter does you well. You should be able to keep growing a lot of those plants even further along into the growing season, the winter growing season. So that's incredible. Thanks for that contribution. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. Kevin saying, here in Georgia, we plant short day onions in October and harvest in spring. I live very close to Vidalia country. That's good. I think I talked about it a couple weeks ago. I talked briefly about onions as far as the short day varieties and the long day varieties. And Georgia is in the southern United States. And so the short day varieties in summer, their days are shorter because those of us that are farther north are having longer days in the summer. So I would be growing an intermediate day or a long day variety. In Georgia, they're growing a short day variety of onion. So that's awesome to actually be able to plant in fall and harvest in spring. That's incredible. I have to do it the other way around because it just gets too cold in our winters for the onions to really grow as well as they should. That's good. OMFUG says, new gardeners really need to understand short, long, and intermediate onions. Depends on where you live. Exactly. And so there's a lot of gardening, you know, and I say this all the time. As you become more experienced, as you try new things, like seeds, for instance, I discovered the difference between short day, intermediate day, and long day onions one year when I tried to grow Vidalia onions. And Vidalia onions just did not do at all well in my garden. They didn't even come close to growing into bulbs. And I just figured it was because I was a relatively new gardener and had no idea what I was doing. But as I looked into it to figure out why my onions might not have grown so well, well, it's because I found out that I was growing the wrong kind of onion for my region. Mistakes happen. Hopefully you can learn from those mistakes, but onions are a great example of how where you live makes a huge difference in what you can grow. So I'm so glad that you added that, because that's exactly right. You need to know where you live and what plants can do best for you, and not all plants will do well. Jay Dixon says, can you mention your store? I provided a link and discount code. Thanks. Yeah, I'll go ahead and put that up. And again, you are just so incredible the way you are keeping me on track and helping the channel out. So through the end of the month, if you use this code, below all my videos, you will see some t-shirts and lots of other merchandise. If you click on one of those links, it'll take you to the store. And if you use this code, the Gardner Scott 2020, it'll give you a 15% discount all through the month of December. The shipping, it's too late to get anything for Christmas, but you can still use the code, and you can still take advantage of that discount through the end of the year. And I meant to look up, I think Teespring, the company that makes the t-shirts, I think this week they may have been offering free shipping. So if you check out some of that merchandise with that code, if you're going to buy something, also check on that site, because they might be offering free shipping. You're not going to get it by Christmas, but they might be offering free shipping. I think I saw an email about that, and I'm not sure if there's a code associated. I'll check that out at the end of the video. If there is a code, I'll go ahead and post it on my homepage for the Gardner Scott channel. Kristen Gruch, thank you for that contribution. Thumbs up if you see this, please. I'll give you a thumbs up. And anyone else that wants to give the channel a thumbs up, great. But thank you. Thumbs up, Kristen. I appreciate that. Thanks so much. Rebecca is saying, Gardner Scott, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. I plan to plant asparagus and strawberries next year. I've read that they can be companion planted in one single bed. Would you recommend this? Yes, sure. It's one of those things that it does depend on how you grow your asparagus. Most asparagus, like the asparagus I've got growing in my asparagus beds, are planted 6 to 12 inches deep. And if you plant asparagus at different levels, the spears will emerge at different times. So one of the things you can do with asparagus is you can get a longer harvest season of asparagus by planting the roots at different levels. My shallowest asparagus is at 6 inches. So I do have plenty of space for growing strawberries, because the strawberry roots are typically not going to grow deeper than 6 inches. So as long as the roots aren't interfering with each other, then you can definitely companion plant like that. However, if you have been growing asparagus from seed, or if you transplanted the roots and they are shallower than like 6 inches, then you might have an issue with putting strawberries or any other plant in that bed, because now the strawberry roots and the runners as they root can interfere with the asparagus roots if they're shallow. So it depends on how deep the asparagus is. It's something to try. I encourage my asparagus to spread out, and so I'm not growing other plants in my asparagus beds, just so they've got plenty of room for new roots to grow without any interference at all, even though I know my asparagus is deeper than that. But another one of those things, give it a try. See how it works, see how your plants do. And if you have any problems with either the strawberries or the asparagus, well, then you can pull out the strawberries. I would pull out the strawberries and not the asparagus, and transplant the strawberries someplace else. Okay. And Heidi says, there seems to be a slight delay. That sometimes happens. I hope it's not too much on my end, but thanks for pointing that out. So Richard W. says, got white and purple asparagus, got 2 more years before I harvest. I can't wait. That's awesome. Yeah, I put my asparagus in this last year, and so I've got 2 more years to wait. 3 years is typically the time you should wait to harvest your asparagus. So I'm with you, buddy. That's one of those things that it's so hard waiting, but you got to do it. The same with your fruit trees, your fruit bushes. You got to get them in the ground as soon as you can. And I've talked about this in an earlier video. As soon as you start building your garden and you put your plan together for where your beds are going to be, get those perennial plants in the ground. Get that asparagus in the ground. Get those fruit bushes, those fruit trees, get them in the ground, because it's going to be years before you can harvest. And it's so much better to get them in first. Before you build your raised beds, before you amend your in-ground beds, before you do any of that, get those plants in the ground that are going to take a long time, because the closer it gets, the harder it becomes to wait for the harvest. I definitely know it. So Letha Lee's Fox is asking if asparagus is okay to do in 5-gallon buckets. I wouldn't recommend it. You can. One of the advantages for asparagus is that it's a perennial plant. It will come back every year, but it's going to be 3 years before you can harvest asparagus. And the roots will begin to spread quite a bit. And so a 5-gallon bucket is a little bit limiting. You can grow asparagus in it if your only option is to grow in buckets. If you don't have the space to grow in a raised bed or in ground and you want to grow asparagus, by all means you should. But you're going to need about a dozen plants per person to really get substantial harvest to eat and preserve. And in a 5-gallon bucket, you can really only grow 1 plant. You might be able to get away with 2, but you really shouldn't have more than 1. So you're talking about a whole bunch of buckets. And I think if you've got the space to do a bed, because it's a permanent plant, it's going to be there for decades. You want a permanent location rather than a 5-gallon bucket that's going to break down in the sun, because that plastic will break down in the UV lights. That isn't something I would recommend. So, and your little dog, OMG, I finally made it to a live. Hello, Gardener Scott. Hello to you. I'm glad you made it to a live as well. If you're just checking in, we're getting close to the end. I'm sorry to see if you just checked in, but I'm so glad you made it live. As always, this will replay. It takes a little bit before YouTube turns it into another video, but you could actually click at the back at the beginning. While you're on right now, you can click back at the beginning and catch up on anything you missed as well. So good to have you here. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. That's awesome. And Kevin, thank you for that. Welcome to and your little dog too. And Jay Dixon, thank you for welcoming as well. See, isn't this a great community? Isn't this just awesome that one person can check in and we have all these others that are giving a welcome? You all are so fantastic. You are all just incredible people. Gardeners are incredible people, but Gardener Scott community gardeners are all just incredible. So I think that's so awesome. Heidi saying, how do you amend the soil around asparagus plants because they are there for so many years? I amend from the top. And so I add compost and mulch every year. And that's how I amend my asparagus beds. And when you've got the earthworms and you've got a healthy soil life, all of that top-based material will find its way down into the plants. And especially compost. Every time it rains, every time you water, it's going through that compost and it's taking nutrients down into the soil. One of the things that I learned recently, actually, I told you I was watching some of Dr. Elaine Ingham's videos and reading some more books. We often use the term compost tea a little bit different than how many of the soil scientists interpret it. And so compost tea is made by using compost. You use some type of bubbler to aerate the water and increase bacterial action. And then when you use the compost tea, it's primarily because of the bacteria within that tea that you're adding to the leaves as a foliar spray, for instance. But if you take compost and you soak it and you just use that liquid, it's compost extract, which might be a new term for you because it was a relatively new term for me. And so compost extract is more for the nutrients rather than the bacteria. So compost tea is made to introduce bacteria to your soil. Compost extract is used to introduce nutrients to your soil. So if you're putting compost on top of your soil, then every time you water and every time it rains, you're introducing compost extract and all those nutrients into your soil. And so I know a few weeks ago I mentioned this same topic, and I said that you're essentially adding compost tea to your soil every time you water, but it's compost extract. So a little bit of a difference in terminology and definition. And so as I move forward, I'll be highlighting the difference between that. Linda Hardwick, thank you for that contribution. Have a wonderful Christmas, Gardener Scott. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas too. And as we get to the end of our show, I wanted to go ahead and finish up with a little bit of that holiday spirit. Of course, wishing you all happy holidays, regardless of what holiday you might be celebrating, or even if you're not celebrating a holiday. This is just a wonderful time of year to help spread some joy, to help spread some goodwill. And for those of us that are celebrating Christmas, to wish Merry Christmas, to give the gifts to our family and our friends. And that's how I wanted to end the discussion this week, is talking about that idea. When you have the opportunity, and it shouldn't be just during the holidays, it should be year-round, but the holidays are a great time of year to really make a point to share gardening. I think this is just such an awesome opportunity. All of us that are part of this community, all of us who are gardeners, we are all wonderful people. And we like sharing time with each other. We like sharing our gardener stories. Well, I encourage that you share that gardening spirit. During the time of holiday spirit, think in terms of gardening spirit, and share gardening spirit at this time of year and throughout the year. And it can be, like we talked in the beginning today, sharing seeds. If you've got seeds that are extra, share some of your seeds with someone who maybe is new to gardening, or maybe someone who's never tried that plant. They might be an old expert gardener, but if you've discovered some new variety and you've got some extra seeds, you, being a brand new gardener, can share something with someone else who is an old experienced gardener, and I guarantee you it's going to be appreciated. As you give gifts to your family and your friends, think gardening. I'm doing some of that. I know my daughter may be on now. She'll definitely be watching this in replay, so I'm not going to say what I'm getting them, but gardening is part of my gift giving, because it's just one of those things to spark that spirit, to spark that wonderful warmth that we all have when we're outside growing plants. So if you give gifts, think about giving a gift that is gardening related. If you don't exchange gifts, well, you can still give the gift of gardening any time of year, be it a tool, be it the seeds, be it knowledge, be it just the happiness that you have, the stories to be able to share. I share my time, I share my knowledge, I share my experiences, because I get as much from it as I think you do. I just really like doing this. And if you get that mindset where you're sharing your time, you're sharing your experiences, you're sharing your stories, you'll get that same satisfaction. You'll get that same joy. And it just is a pay it forward kind of thing. Now that other person gets that same feeling and they want to share it all as well. So think about just the fact that you are a gardener, which makes you such a special person, and that you can share. You have something that is beneficial to share with the people in your life and with the world at large. That's something that I'm doing at every opportunity, and it's just such a wonderful thing. It just makes me feel so good And I know so many of you are benefiting from it. I know so many of you appreciate it. All of the super chats, all the well wishes. I do so sincerely appreciate it, which is why I just want to keep giving back, and I want to keep giving more. And you can get that same thing by just sharing the gift of gardening. Doesn't have to be on the solstice, doesn't have to be at Christmas. In fact, often it's at the time of year when you're not even thinking about it that it's best to receive the gift of gardening. You know, those deep, dark days of winter when you're starting to feel a little depressed because you can't go outside and garden. It's just so nice to get a seed catalog in the mail on that day. Well, imagine how great it would feel if you received a package of seeds from a gardener friend on a day that you weren't even expecting it. Well, you can do the same thing. And I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. On those days when people in my family and my set of friends are least expecting it, they're going to get a package of seeds. Or maybe they'll get some gardening gloves. Or maybe they'll get a trowel. Or maybe they'll get something that I haven't even figured out yet. But whatever it is, I'm going to be sharing gardening with my entire network as often as I can. And I encourage that you do the same, because that's how our community grows. And that's how we make many more happy people in the world, because we're making more gardeners, and gardeners are happy people. So there you have it. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. I hope it's a safe season for you. I hope that you can move forward with just a happy gardening attitude, regardless of what holiday you might be celebrating. Next week, I'll be back on Monday. It'll be post-Christmas, and we'll be talking about the new year and preparing for next year's gardening as far as our planning and seeds and all the rest of it. But until then, just have a great gardening week and have a great holiday season. And I hope this season gives you everything that you could possibly hope for, to include health and happiness and maybe a new gardener friend or two. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening, and thank you.